The alarm bells rang through the corridors of the Kepler station, a sound that no one wanted to hear ever again. Captain HFY stood in the command center of the warship Defiant Spark, watching her screens fill with red dots. There were so many red dots, so very many. She was 35 years old with dark eyes that had seen too much war already. Her black hair was pulled back tight, and her uniform showed the marks of someone who had fought in 3 wars across 2 star systems. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. The red dots represented the ships of the Void Collective. They were not one enemy. They were not even an army. They were a plague that moved through space like death itself. The Void Collective did not want to conquer planets or steal resources. They wanted to eat everything. They consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing behind except empty darkness and the echo of screams that no one would ever hear again. Around her, young officers worked at their stations. Jiwoo was her tactical officer, only 26 years old, but brilliant with numbers and strategies. His hands moved fast across his control board, calling out information in a steady voice, even though his face had turned pale. Next to him, Nari watched the communication systems, her fingers moving across buttons and switches like she was playing a very sad song on an instrument of death. "How many?" HFY asked, though she could read the number on her own screen. 2,347 hostile contacts, Jiwoo answered. His voice shook just a little. "And more coming. The scanners show another fleet segment moving into the system every 30 seconds. Captain HFY closed her eyes for one moment. Just one moment. When she opened them again, she was the captain once more, not a woman who was afraid. She had learned long ago that showing fear meant her crew would break apart like old ice. The communication system buzzed. It was Commander Teo, the leader of all 7 Allied fleets. His voice was calm and controlled, the voice of a man who had fought more wars than most people lived years. But HFY could hear something underneath that calm. She could hear the sound of a man saying goodbye. "All units," Commander Teo said. "This is the final order. The Void Collective cannot be stopped. I repeat, cannot be stopped. All ships are to begin evacuation protocols immediately. Save what lives you can. That is all we can do now." The words fell into the command center like stones into deep water. HFY's officers looked at each other. They had fought so hard, so long. They had lost friends, brothers, sisters, and lovers, and now they were being told to run. But HFY's eyes were still on her screens, and she saw something that no one else was seeing. The massive command carrier of the Void Collective hung in space like a dark god. It was a thing that should not exist, a creature and a machine fused together into something that broke the rules of nature itself. It was the center of everything, the brain that controlled the billions of smaller ships that swarmed around it like cells in a living body. And right there, on the left side of its massive frame, there was a moment where the shields flickered. Just for half a second. Then the shields came back strong again. But HFY had seen it, and her mind, which had been trained for 17 years to find weakness in enemy defenses, would not let that moment go. Minsu was her chief engineer, a quiet man who loved machines more than people. He sat in the engine room far below, watching the power systems like a doctor watching a patient. He had already shut down half the systems to protect the core reactor. The Defiant Spark had taken too much damage. The shields were failing. The weapons were almost out of ammunition. The ship was dying, and everyone knew it. But HFY did not give the order to retreat. Instead, she leaned forward and spoke into the communication system. "All hands," she said, and her voice carried through every corridor of her ship. "This is Captain HFY. Stand to your stations." Around the station and the other ships, people paused. Officers looked up from their work. Soldiers stopped moving toward the evacuation ships. Everyone heard those words, and everyone understood what they meant. She was not giving up. Jiwoo looked at her with eyes wide. "Captain, the commander ordered retreat. We don't have the firepower to—" "I know what we don't have," Haiwan said quietly. She pointed at the command carrier on the screen. "But look at this. Do you see this point here, where the shields flicker?" Jiwoo leaned close. He watched the screen. He ran numbers. His fingers flew across the control board, and then his face changed. If we could get through there, if we could reach the core of the carrier." "How long would it take?" Haiwan asked. "To calculate, 5 minutes. To execute, 30 seconds. Haiwan nodded. "And how many shots of full power would we need to break through those shields?" Jiwoo worked for a moment. His hands shook slightly as he moved the mouse. "At current ammunition levels, Captain, we can fire at full strength for maybe 40 seconds, maybe 45 if we push it." Haiwan smiled. It was a small smile, the smile of someone who had found something in the darkness that no one else could see. "Then we have enough." But even as she said the words, she knew what she was asking. She was asking her crew to give up their lives. She was asking them to fly toward certain death. She was asking them to become something other than soldiers. She was asking them to become weapons. And she knew that every single one of them would do it. Nari turned from her communications board. There were tears in her eyes. "Captain, what message should I send to the other ships?" Haiwan looked at her young officer, so full of life and fear and courage all at the same time. She thought about all the people she had lost in the wars. She thought about the planets that had been consumed by the Void Collective. She thought about all the homes and families and dreams that had been taken away. "Tell them," Haiwan said slowly. "Tell them that the Defiant Spark is going in. Tell them that if we succeed, they must run and regroup, and tell the galaxy that humanity fought with honor." Min Su's voice came through the communication system from the engine room below. "Captain, I'm reading your orders. You want full power to the engines?" "All of it," Haiwan confirmed. "Every drop of power we have left." "Can you do that?" There was a pause. Then Minsu's voice came back, steady and sure. "Yes, Captain. We can do that." The Defiant Spark began to move. It was a ship that was already dying, already broken, already bleeding power from a dozen different systems. But it turned toward the command carrier of the Void Collective, this massive dark god that had consumed the lives of trillions. And it began to accelerate. Around them, the Allied fleets began their retreat. Some of the ships saluted before they left. Some sent final messages, but they knew what was happening. They knew that they were watching the last act of the Defiant Spark and her brave captain. They knew that they were watching humans do what humans had always done when the universe tried to break them. They were fighting back, even when fighting back meant certain death. Captain Haiwan sat in her command chair and watched the distance to the target close, second by second. She thought about her family far away on Earth. She thought about the dreams she had given up to become a soldier. And then she stopped thinking about those things. Because there was only the moment, only the mission, only the choice to keep moving forward into the darkness. The Void Collective had consumed entire civilizations, but it had never consumed a human who refused to be consumed. That was about to change. The Defiant Spark pushed through space at speeds that made the old ship groan and shake. Inside the computer center, Jiwoo worked with a kind of desperate focus that would have looked like madness to anyone who did not understand what he was doing. His fingers moved across the control board like he was conducting a symphony of mathematics and physics and impossible hope. "Calculating optimal trajectory," he spoke into his communication device. His young face was lit by the blue glow of the screens, and sweat dripped down his temples even though the ship was becoming colder as systems shut down. "The targeting solution is... It is very difficult, Captain." Captain Haiwan's voice came back through the speakers. Tell me something I can understand, Ji-woo. Not mathematics, real words. Ji-woo took a breath. His hands continued moving even as he spoke. The command carrier is surrounded by shields. Those shields have a weak point, like a single candle flame in a dark room. If we fire at that exact point from exactly the right angle, we can pierce through. But the angle changes every 2.3 seconds as the ship rotates. We must fire at the perfect moment, or the shields will turn away our weapons like water turns away arrows. How much ammunition do we have? HFY asked. 38 seconds of full power fire, Captain. I have checked this 3 times. The answer does not change. 38 seconds. In the engine room deep below the bridge, Min-soo was doing the impossible. The reactors were pushing far beyond what the engineers who built the ship had ever intended. Red warning lights covered every wall. Alarms rang out in patterns that meant serious system failures. His shirt was soaked with sweat and what looked like coolant fluid that had leaked from one of the broken pipes. "All systems are screaming," Min-soo said into his microphone. His voice was calm because engineers did not panic. Engineers solved problems. "The reactor is overheating. We have maybe 10 minutes before the core becomes unstable. Maybe 12 if we are very lucky." "Can you get us to the target?" HFY asked. Min-soo looked at the displays. He looked at the mathematical models of the ship's speed and trajectory. He looked at the distance remaining. "Yes, Captain, with 3 minutes to spare. But, Captain, after we strike, there is no coming back. The engines will be destroyed. The ship will be destroyed. Everything will be destroyed." "I know," HFY said simply. Down in the science lab, Dr. Hae-ju was doing work that no one should have to do. She was a scientist, trained to study life and understand the universe, but today she was calculating explosions and destructive force. She was determining how much explosive power would be needed to penetrate the biological shell of the Void Collective's command carrier and reach its neural core. She was calculating the death of a god, if gods could die. Her assistant was a young technician named Ki-sung, barely 20 years old. He watched her work with the look of someone watching a master create something terrible. "The explosion," Dr. Hae-ju said slowly, "will destroy everything within 50 kilometers. The ship will not survive. No one on the ship will survive." "Are you going to tell the captain that?" Ki-sung asked. Dr. Hae-ju smiled. It was a sad smile. "The captain already knows. She knows everything. She is simply choosing to do it anyway." In the communications center, Nari sat at her station and did what she did best. She spoke to other ships. She spoke to other people far away. She was a bridge between the isolated soldiers on the Defiant Spark and the rest of the galaxy, and she had a very important message to send. "All Allied vessels," she said into her communication system. "This is the Defiant Spark. Captain HFY sends the following message. She says that all evacuation ships should jump to hyperspace immediately. Do not wait for us. Do not try to help. Save the people. Save the families. Save those who can still be saved." The response came back from Commander Teo himself. His voice was heavy with emotion, which was rare for someone of his rank. "Defiant Spark, this is Fleet Command. We are reading your power signature. We understand what you are doing. The galaxy will remember you. Humanity will remember you. You have our respect and our gratitude." "Tell him thank you," HFY said to Nari, and then she added, "And tell him that if we succeed, he must live. He must survive to tell the story. That is an order." The distance to the target kept getting smaller. The Void Collective's ships tried to stop the Defiant Spark, but it was too fast, too committed, too determined. Weapons fire struck the human ship again and again, and the armor bent and cracked and slowly gave way. On the bridge, HFY stood from her command chair. She walked to the window and looked out at the stars. She thought about what Ji-woo had told her. 38 seconds of fire. That was not very much time, but it was enough if they used it correctly. "All hands," she said into the communication system. "This is Captain Haywan. I want you to know that this is not a suicide mission. This is a victory. What we are doing today will change the galaxy. What we are doing today will show the universe what humans can do when we refuse to break. What we are doing today will be remembered for 1,000 years." She paused. Then she added, "I am proud of every single one of you. You are the finest soldiers I have ever served with. You are the bravest people I have ever known. And if I had to choose a ship and a crew to go to the end of everything, I would choose all of you. Every single time, I would choose you." In the weapons room, the master of the guns was a soldier named Q-Tayek. He was a big man with scarred hands and eyes that had the look of someone who had been through too many battles. He checked his weapons one final time. He made sure the ammunition was loaded correctly. He made sure that every system was ready. 38 seconds, he said to himself. I can do a lot of damage in 38 seconds. And he meant it. He had trained for 20 years to be the best weapons officer in the entire human fleet. And today, he was going to show the galaxy exactly what that meant. The red dots on the radar screens kept getting larger. The command carrier was now visible on the visual displays, a massive shape that seemed to cover half the sky. It was beautiful and terrible, like a god made of darkness and hunger. Jiwoo called out, 30 seconds to firing range, Captain. Haywan took a deep breath. She thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. She thought about every decision she had ever made as a soldier and as a captain. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was the right choice. All weapons crews, she said, prepare to fire on my command. This is it. This is everything we have trained for. This is why we exist. Stand ready. The ship shook as weapons impacts struck the hull. Fire and damage reports flooded the screens. But still the defiant spark moved forward toward the moment that would change everything. 20 seconds to firing range. 10 seconds. 5, 3, 2, 1. Fire, Captain Haywan commanded. And the defiant spark became a star. The first volley of fire from the defiant spark's weapon systems cut through space like knives made of pure light. Every cannon, every missile launcher, every energy beam that the ship had left was directed at a single point on the command carrier's surface. The point where the shields flickered, the point where a small human ship with brave people inside could actually cause real damage. The initial burst of firepower was so intense that it lit up the entire battle zone like a sudden sunrise. Ships that were far away felt the radiation wash over them like heat from an open furnace. The Void Collective's smaller vessels, those endless swarms that did the creature's bidding, paused for a single moment. Even a hive mind could recognize danger when it saw it. Q-Take, the weapons master, worked at his station with the skill of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. But this was different. This was the last time. His hands moved across the controls, redirecting power, adjusting aim by fractions of degrees, pushing the weapon systems harder and faster than they had ever been pushed. 30 seconds, he called out. The shield at the target point was flickering now, fracturing under the intense bombardment. The Defiant Spark's weapons were the best that human engineering could build, and they were all pouring their fury into that single weak spot. Explosions bloomed on the command carrier's surface like flowers made of fire. But the Void Collective was not passive. It could not sit still and wait to be destroyed. The hive mind understood that it was under attack, and it responded with the fury of a god that had never been challenged before. The swarms of smaller Void Collective ships turned their weapons toward the Defiant Spark, thousands of them, tens of thousands. The human ship became the center of a storm of fire and energy and pure destructive force. The shields, already damaged and weak, flared bright red under the impact. 20 seconds! Q-Tyke shouted. An explosion rocked the weapons room. One of the missile launchers took a direct hit and exploded in a cascade of fire and metal. Q-Tyke was thrown against the wall, but he got back up. There was blood on his face, but his hands went back to the controls. 20 seconds was not enough to break a soldier who had decided to see this thing through to the end. On the bridge, HFY held onto the arm of her command chair as the ship bucked and twisted under the impact of countless weapon strikes. The lights flickered, some systems went offline completely, but she kept her eyes on the target. She kept her focus on the single point where their attack was breaking through. The command carrier's shield at the target location was failing. She could see it now. The biological material underneath was exposed. The machine parts were visible. They were close, so very close to breaking through the outer shell. 15 seconds! Q-Tyke's voice was hoarse now from shouting and from breathing the smoke that was filling the weapons room. The defiant spark was being torn apart. More explosions rocked the ship. A whole section of the outer hull tore away, exposing the inner corridors to the vacuum of space. Alarms screamed. Red emergency lights flashed, but still the weapons fired. Still the bullets and energy blasts and missiles poured forth like a river of human defiance. In the engine room, Min-Su felt the ship breaking around him. The reactors were screaming. The cooling systems had failed. If this went on for much longer, the reactor would explode and take the entire ship with it in a flash of brilliant destruction. But Min-Su did not shut down the systems. He kept them running. He kept feeding power to the weapons. He kept the ship moving forward. "Come on," he said to the machines around him, to the ship that had served humanity so well. "Come on, just a little longer, just a few more seconds." 10 seconds, Q-Tyke cried out. The shield was breaking. HFY could see it clearly now. The weak point was expanding, cracks spreading across the surface of the barrier like ice, breaking on a frozen lake. Just a few more seconds and they would break through. Just a few more moments and they would succeed. But the Void Collective was not going to allow that. The command carrier suddenly accelerated, moving away from the defiant Spark's line of fire. It was a small movement, just a few degrees, but it was enough to move the weak point away from the stream of fire. Ji-Woo saw it happen. His young face went pale with horror. "Captain, the target is moving. We are losing alignment." For one moment, everything seemed to slow down. For one moment, HFY could see the entire battle playing out in her mind. The shield realigning, the weapons fire missing, the evacuation ships escaping. The galaxy saved, but the Void Collective still alive, still hungry, still waiting for another chance to consume everything. She could not allow that. "Evasive maneuvers," she commanded. "Hard turn to port." "Captain, we cannot maneuver," the helmsman called back. "The ship is too damaged. Any sharp turn will—" "Do it!" HFY roared. The defiant spark twisted in space with a movement that should have torn it apart. The inertial dampeners screamed in protest. Structural supports snapped and broke, but the ship moved, and as it moved, the line of fire realigned with the target. 5 seconds, Q-Tyke yelled. The weapons fire was reconnecting with the weak point. The shield was fracturing again. The biological and mechanical material underneath was beginning to separate. But the maneuver had cost them. The defiant spark could not take much more punishment. The hull was breaching in multiple locations. The power systems were barely functional. 3 seconds, Q-Tyke counted. HFY held her breath. She had asked her crew to do the impossible. She had asked them to sacrifice everything, and they were doing it. They were actually doing it. 2, 1, fire! She commanded. The weapons went silent. The ammunition was gone. For an endless moment, nothing happened. The command carrier was slightly behind them now, moving away. HFY's heart dropped. They had failed. They had used all their ammunition, and they had failed. But then something happened that no one expected. The point where the Defiant Spark's weapons had been striking suddenly exploded from the inside. The damage that had accumulated, the cracks that had spread, the weaknesses that had been exposed, they all gave way at once. The outer shell of the command carrier ruptured. Equipment and biological material spilled out into space. The creature at the center of the hive mind, the god that had consumed entire civilizations, suddenly had a hole in its armor. It had been penetrated, and at that moment, Captain Haywan made a choice that would echo through history. "All weapons are offline," Nari reported, her voice shaking. "I know," Haywan said quietly. Ji-Woo looked at her with confusion in his young eyes. "Captain, we still have power. We can still maneuver. We can still—" "No," Haywan said. She looked at the command carrier on her screen, at the breach they had created, at the vulnerability they had exposed. "We are out of ammunition. There is nothing left to fire." "But Captain, what do we do now?" Ji-Woo asked. Haywan leaned back in her chair, and she smiled. "Then," she said simply, "I'll throw the ship." When Captain Haywan gave the order to throw the ship, the meaning of her words was simple. The Defiant Spark had no ammunition left, but it still had one weapon. It still had mass. It still had momentum. And it still had people inside it who refused to give up. "Minsu," she said into the communication device, "I need everything. Every ounce of power in the reactors. Push it beyond the safety limits. I do not care anymore about damage or warnings. I need speed." In the engine room, Minsu understood immediately. He had suspected this might come, but hearing the words still made him take a deep breath. This was the end of everything, but it was also the moment that mattered most. "Understood, Captain," he said. His hands moved across the control panels, overriding every safety system that the engineers had built into the ship. "Pushing reactors to maximum, all power to the engines." The Defiant Spark accelerated. It was a ship that was already damaged beyond repair, already bleeding power from 100 different systems, already dying. But now it did not try to survive. Now it embraced its own destruction and used that destruction as a weapon. The acceleration pushed everyone inside the ship backward. Screens cracked, equipment fell from shelves, but no one screamed, no one ran. The crew of the Defiant Spark had made their choice, and they would see it through to the end. "Trajectory set," Ji-Woo reported, his voice steady even as the world shook around him. "We will impact the command carrier in exactly 53 seconds. Captain Haywan stood from her command chair and looked at her bridge crew. She saw Nari and Ji-Woo and the other young faces that had worked so hard to bring them to this moment. She saw soldiers who had decided to be more than soldiers. She saw people who had decided to be hope. "All hands," she said into the communication system, and her voice carried through every corridor of the ship. "This is your captain. We are going to hit that thing in 53 seconds. We are going to hit it so hard that it will never recover. We are going to prove to the entire galaxy that humans do not break. We do not surrender. We do not fade away." She paused. Then she added, "You are the finest crew that has ever served in a human warship. You are soldiers and engineers and doctors and scientists, and today you are becoming legends. In 1,000 years, people will still be telling stories about what you did here. Thank you. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for being human." The communication system went quiet except for the sound of the engines, which sounded like the roar of an enormous beast. 40 seconds now. 39. 38. In the weapons room, Q-Tax sat on the floor. His hands were burned from working the controls. His face was bloody, but he was smiling. He had done what he was trained to do. He had been the best weapons officer in the fleet, and today he had proven it. In the science lab, Dr. Haeju and Ki-sung worked on preparing the explosives. These were not weapons meant to be fired from a distance. These were charges that would need to be placed by hand, deep inside the command carrier. They would need to be placed inside the very heart of the enemy, inside the biological and mechanical core where the consciousness of the Void Collective lived. "Are the charges ready?" Dr. Heiju asked. "Yes, Doctor," Kaisung said. His young voice was shaking, but his hands were steady. "They are ready." "Then we are ready," Dr. Heiju said. 20 seconds now." The command carrier was growing larger, filling up the viewport of the Defiant Spark. The breach that their weapons had created was clearly visible. It was a wound in something that should not be woundable. It was proof that even gods could bleed. Captain Hei Wan strapped herself into her command chair. Around her, the crew did the same. They held onto railings and handholds, preparing for impact. 10 seconds. 9. 8. The Void Collective tried to move away, but it was too late. The Defiant Spark was moving too fast. The command carrier's shields could not stop something that was moving at this speed. The shields were designed to turn away weapons fire and energy blasts, not to stop a massive warship that had decided to become a missile. 7. 6. 5. In the corridors of the Defiant Spark, soldiers and crew members held on to anything they could find. They said prayers to gods that they had forgotten. They thought about their families far away. They thought about the homes they would never see again. 4, 3, 2. Min Su, in the engine room, watched the reactor readouts spike beyond anything that was safe or sane. The machine was screaming now, actually screaming as it pushed power far beyond what it was designed to handle. But it was still working. It was still giving him everything he asked for. 1, 0. The Defiant Spark hit the command carrier at a speed that should have destroyed both vessels. But the Defiant Spark was already broken, already falling apart. All that happened was that it fell apart faster, with purpose, driving deeper and deeper into the massive biological machine that was the heart of the Void Collective. The impact was not quick. It was not clean. The ship tore its way through the outer layers of the command carrier like a knife through flesh. Explosions bloomed throughout both vessels. Hull breaches opened up on all sides. The screaming of tearing metal and breaking systems filled the void of space. The bridge of the Defiant Spark twisted and broke under the force of impact. Screens went black. Emergency lighting flickered on. Captain Hei Wan hung in her chair, held in place by the straps, her whole body aching from the impact. But she was alive. She was alive, and the ship was inside. "Damage report," she coughed. Nari's voice came back, distorted and distant. "Captain, all sections are reporting breaches. We have lost multiple levels. Power is failing in the outer rings. But Captain, we are inside. The ship is deep inside the command carrier." "Get me everyone who can still move," Hei Wan said. "I want soldiers with Dr. Heiju. We are going into the center. We are going to put those charges where they belong." She released herself from the chair and stood up. Her leg was hurt. She could feel the pain. But it did not matter. Nothing mattered except the mission. Nothing mattered except pushing forward. Ji-woo was still alive, slumped over his console. She helped him up. Q-Take appeared from the weapons room. His hands still burned. Nari got up from her station. One by one, the survivors of the bridge crew gathered around their captain. "Come on," Hei Wan said. "We have work to do." And she led them down into the darkness of the broken ship and toward the heart of the enemy. The corridors of the Void Collective's command carrier were not like any human ship or building. They were organic. The walls seemed to pulse like they were alive. Fluid that looked like blood dripped from the ceiling. The air was cold and thick and smelled like rot and electricity mixed together into something that made every human who breathed it want to vomit. Captain Hei Wan led her team through these strange passages. Dr. Heiju followed close behind, carrying the charges that would destroy this thing. Ki-sung was with them, barely more than a boy but trying not to show his fear. Several soldiers came too, armed with weapons that still had ammunition in them. Their names were Sojin and Taesung, and they had been trained to die if necessary. The passages twisted in directions that did not make sense. Up and down seemed to change as they walked. Sometimes gravity felt normal. Sometimes it felt like they were falling sideways. The command carrier was not built like something that followed the rules of the universe. It was built like something that had decided to rewrite those rules. "We need to go deeper," Dr. Heiju said, looking at a strange device in her hand. It was a scanner that she had built herself, something that could detect the biological patterns of the Void Collective. The patterns were getting stronger. The core was close. They could hear sounds in the walls. Sounds like growling. Sounds like something vast and ancient moving slowly awake. The Void Collective knew that they were here. The god that lived in this creature was becoming aware of the infection that had burrowed into its body. "Faster!" HFY commanded. They ran. Behind them they heard sounds, things moving in the walls, tentacles pushing through the organic material like worms emerging from soil. The Void Collective was defending itself now. It was sending parts of itself to destroy the humans that had dared to invade. Taesung fired his weapon at a shape that emerged from the wall. The shot was good, and the tentacle recoiled in pain. But more came. There were always more. The command carrier was alive, and every part of it could fight. "There!" Kisung pointed ahead. The passages opened up into a massive chamber. It was large enough to hold 100 human ships, but what filled it was not empty space. In the center was the core of the Void Collective. It was a thing of beauty and horror combined. It was a vast brain made of organic material and metal fused together, with networks of nerves and machinery spreading out from it like the roots of a god tree. It was alive, and it was watching them. At the center of the core, there was a pulse of light. It was blue and purple and colors that did not have names. It was the consciousness of the Void Collective itself, the thing that had consumed entire civilizations. The thing that had killed trillions. Dr. Heiju approached slowly, her charges held in front of her like an offering to a god. "This is it," she said quietly. "This is the heart. If we destroy this, we destroy all of it. The consciousness, the hive mind, everything." "How long to arm the charges?" HFY asked. 3 minutes, Dr. Heiju said. "I need 3 minutes to place them correctly and set the timer." HFY nodded. She turned to the soldiers with her. "Protect her. Kill anything that tries to stop her. Anything at all." Sojin and Taesung took positions in front of the scientist, their weapons raised and ready. Behind them, HFY stood with Kisung. She had a pistol in her hand. It was not much of a weapon against something as large as the core, but it was what she had. The Void Collective responded to the threat. The tentacles that filled the chamber began to move. They moved with purpose now, moving to crush and destroy the humans that had invaded its body. The very ground beneath them began to shake. Dr. Heiju worked with steady hands. She did not look up. She did not acknowledge the danger. She was a scientist, and she had a task. She placed the charges carefully into the weak points that she had calculated. Each charge was attached to the core material, each one positioned to cause maximum damage to the consciousness at the center. 1 minute passed. The first tentacle reached the soldiers. Sojin fired, and the tentacle fell back, but 2 more came in its place. This was not a fight that could be won. This was holding back the tide with a bucket. 2 minutes. "Almost done," Dr. Heiju said, her voice not shaking even as the ground shook. Taesung screamed. A tentacle had wrapped around his leg and was pulling him away from his position. Kisung moved without thinking. The young boy ran forward and cut the tentacle with a knife that he had pulled from his belt. The grip released, and Taesung scrambled back to his position. But more kept coming. More and more and more. The Void Collective was willing to sacrifice any number of its parts to destroy this threat. 3 minutes. "Done!" Dr. Heiju cried out. "The charges are armed! Go!" Heiwan shouted. The team ran back the way they had come. Behind them, they could hear the alarms beginning to sound. The charges had started their countdown. In 30 seconds, they would explode. In 30 seconds, the consciousness at the center of the Void Collective would be destroyed. The corridors were harder to navigate running. Passages that had seemed clear were now blocked by falling debris. The whole structure was beginning to collapse as it sensed its own death approaching. Heiwan pushed Ki-sung ahead of her. She would not leave anyone behind if she could help it. 20 seconds. They burst out of the passage that led away from the core chamber. Behind them, they could see light growing brighter. The explosion was starting. The charges were beginning to do their work. 10 seconds. They ran through the twisted passages toward the edge of the command carrier, toward the breach that the defiant spark had created when it had rammed this creature. 5 seconds. Behind them, the light became unbearable. The explosion was happening. The charges were tearing the core apart. 1 second. They threw themselves through the breach into empty space. The explosion happened behind them. It was not loud because there was no air to carry sound. But it was bright. It was so bright that it felt like they were flying into the sun itself. The entire command carrier came apart. The biological material burned and destroyed itself. The machinery that had kept the consciousness alive was torn to pieces. The Void Collective's god was dying. In space around the broken pieces of the command carrier, something extraordinary happened. The millions of smaller ships that made up the Void Collective's swarms suddenly stopped. Without the central consciousness, without the hive mind that controlled them, they became lost. They attacked each other randomly. They moved in circles, no longer part of a unified force. The threat was broken. The god was dead. And the humans had done it. Captain Heiwan and her team were pulled inside an emergency evacuation pod just before the last piece of the defiant spark fell apart. They floated in darkness, surrounded by the pieces of the ship that had carried them to destiny. Around them, the Allied fleets began their counterattack. Without central command, the Void Collective was just meat and machines. It could be killed. It could be defeated. And the humans, the weak species that the galaxy had never believed in, had been the ones to make it possible.